I saw an interview on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream that was on YouTube, and the link is below in the description of this video. And I think it highlighted what is one of our many problems right now when it comes to politics and how things are going in the United States. As Graham and Blumenthal continually referenced how America dealt with the crisis on the world in World War II, as if America is in the same place it was in World War II, as if the world is in the same place it was in World War II. They continue to make reference in particular to how we converted our industrial base to military products from civilian products. Blumenthal even referenced the Defense Production Act, and he said, which we used in the Korean War, can convert civilian capacity to produce the artillery, the vehicles, all of the stuff that the industrial base can produce if it's given the right demand signal. In other words, if industry is guaranteed that Congress is going to pay for bullets and bombs, then industry will convert the existing equipment from whatever it's manufacturing to the production of bullets and bombs. Of course, we just saw during the pandemic that we had a hard time trying to figure out how to produce enough masks and other items that were deemed essential for dealing with the issues in the pandemic. It highlighted the fact that we no longer have an industrial base in America today like we did in World War II. So there's essentially nothing to convert. And over again in the conversation, Graham and Blumenthal were echoing sentiments that sounded like they were straight out of the end of the 20th century, post World War II, as opposed to where we're at here in the first half of the 21st century. They were responding to an article that J.D. Vance had written, opinion piece, opinion essay in the New York Times on April 12th, in which J.D. Vance simply is saying, let's do the numbers. What about the actual material that is needed to fight this conflict, and how is America, Ukraine ultimately, but ultimately America, set to produce the material needed for just this conflict against Russia versus Russia's military production capacity. And this is against the backdrop of all the wars that are going on and that are suggested might go on, particularly the Israel conflict with Hamas and by extension Iran, and the trouble in the Far East with China and Taiwan and what's going on there. But all of this, the whole interview to me, simply highlighted how out of touch our leaders are in dealing with the situation of the world today as they continue to operate from a World War II mindset. And when I say our leaders, I'm not saying all of them, obviously. J.D. Vance, I think, presents some pretty good arguments for how, in fact, we ought to be handling ourselves in the world today. Vivek Ramaswamy's whole campaign, I think, suggested some things that need to be looked at. And while I disagree with virtually all of the far left and progressive policy positions and the stance they're taking, I think if we listen to what's going on college campuses and around the United States today, particularly in relation to the Israel conflict, we would see that we no longer have an America that is in the same position mentally and that it was in World War II after Pearl Harbor got bombed. So to try to point to America in the 1940s as a proxy for America in the 2020s is to skew the view of how Americans really feel about what's going on in the world. And I think part of this is a result of the fact that if we look at the history of Ukraine and over the last and post Soviet Union, I think we'll see, as outlined by John Mearsheimer and others, that America has actually failed on the world stage to try to secure a world in which peace and prosperity are more likely than war and destruction. And in fact, as Eisenhower warned, the military-industrial complex has been very successful in establishing a need for what they produce to their benefit and to the destruction of the world and others. One of the biggest concerns I have about how this whole Ukraine conflict and Israel conflict and other conflicts is being presented was expressed by Graham in this interview. He said, if you want American military members to stay out of the fighting with Russia or the fight with Russia, help Ukraine. I find it extremely bothering, disingenuous at best, that part of the argument that our leaders continually make for passing the debt that is required to try to foster these conflicts or fosters supporting these conflicts is that we need them to die so that we don't have to die. If there's a battle that America ought to be fighting, then Americans ought to be fighting it. If not, then we need to take serious pause to consider what is our justification for providing munitions for others to die. And I think we are going to have a lot to account for by suggesting that others ought to die so that we don't have to die for principles that we purport to stand for, when in fact they may be principles that others don't hold. If they're the right principles, then we ought to be debating those principles with a battle of words, not a battle of bullets and bombs. That's what America ought to be standing for. The right to engage in debates over ideas about how life ought to be, rather than the insistence with bullets and bombs on how life must be. The whole framing of this conflict as presented by Graham and Blumenthal to me reflects an inability or an unwillingness to adjust to the world when we had a world that was different after the fall of the Soviet Union, when we had a chance to redirect world policy, political policy, American political policy, towards more peaceful efforts to convey the American dream, as opposed to using conflict to convey the American dream, which by its very nature, the use of conflict destroys the American dream and the ideals that we purport to be sharing with the rest of the world. One other thing, the justification for sending money to Ukraine and sending money to Israel has over and over been, well, they're buying American bombs with the money we give them, as if our military industrial base ought to be the foundation of our economy and a justification for fostering war and conflict and death and destruction around the world. We really need to rethink how, in fact, we are leading in the world, and we need some significant changes, more ideas like J.D. Vance, fewer ideas like Graham and Blumenthal being represented on the world stage. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those, and as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.